Good afternoon. My name is Arlene Mednick, also known as the Chair of Concerned Citizens. As the Chair of Concerned Citizens, I am proud that you have come here in the sunshine, with the sunshine outside. Next time we pray for rain. It doesn't matter, because the Brooksby audience is a fabulous audience and a very special audience. And thank you very, very much for coming. We have some sign-up sheets outside, and I think they may be on the table in the back. This does not obligate you to anything. We will send you one reminder before a speaker. And if there is something that you can do politically or something for one of our causes, we may let you know about that, like we did the last time when they were talking about medical aid in dying. Okay. It only asks for your name and email. You are not a member. You are not obligated to anything, and we will not bother you a lot. Because we consider every resident to be a member of Concerned Citizens. Okay. We know what you want to hear, and we will bring them to you. We are very happy to be able to do this on the third Tuesday of every month. Go back to your calendars. On the third Tuesday in every month, write in Concerned Citizens. We will be here at 2:00. And please, for our Q&A, wait until you raise your hand and we will bring a microphone to you. And I am so pleased to be able to introduce member of our board, who will introduce our speaker today.
Good afternoon. My name's Neil Gillis, and I welcome all of you on behalf of Concerned Citizens to hear our guest speaker today, Linda Andros, and her topic is how vast inequalities in wealth can destroy democracy. Ms. Andros became a practicing attorney in 1980, and she served as an assistant district attorney for Essex County, during which time she tried 70-plus criminal cases. She became a Massachusetts Assistant Attorney General involved in litigating 30-plus civil jury trials. Ms. Andros went on to receive a master's degree in international law from Georgetown University. Our speaker was an attorney advisor in the U.S. Department of Commerce, where she enforced international laws against countries like China and Russia, and negotiated a trade agreement with the Ukraine on steel. She became a senior counsel at the law firm of Dewey Ballantine in Washington, where she worked with domestic producers harmed by unfair imports from countries like China and Brazil. Ms. Andros served as a legislative counsel and lobbyist for the United Steelworkers Union, working on legislative changes to U.S. trade policies to protect workers and retain and expand U.S. manufacturing. A wide variety of expertise and knowledge. I'd like a Brooksby welcome for Linda Andros, please.
Thank you, Neil, for that very generous introduction. Thank you, everyone. Hello. Thank you for coming, and thank you for inviting me. So my talk today is really a back to basics. First of all, can you hear me? All right, let me know. Raise your hand if you can hear me. But this is a back to basics look at a key question. How much wealth inequality can a democracy tolerate and remain a democracy? Is there any limit? That's the key question. Today is really a short version of an introductory lecture that I gave on how populism and tyranny can come about in a democracy. Again, it's a very big picture look at this key question through some biology and some economics. Not many specific facts or figures. Right? You'd be glad, but I hope it gets you thinking. Right? First, let's look at the biology of we humans for a little bit here. We're the primary actor in the world. Knowing human nature, our biology, it gives us a better grasp of the forces that repeat over and over in history, especially around differences in amassing wealth. We're a species, right? And we have a definable nature, like any other species. This is objective, and we all share it. We can look to Aristotle and a modern-day psychologist, and they describe our human needs in the same way. And that's because our nature is unchanging. Our DNA doesn't change. It remains the same. Needs like physical and economic security, pleasures, curiosity, knowledge, friendship, community, self-worth, respect of others, purpose beyond self. These are all human needs. The ancient Greeks tell us that a life lived in keeping with our human nature is a good life. Makes sense to satisfy all of our human needs in the proper proportion. The same can be said to how to construct a good society, one that provides enough opportunity and protection to its people to pursue a good life. Right? What our founders called our inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And happiness here has a very definite meaning. It's the fulfilling of our human needs in the right measure to have a fruitful life. Say, having enough wealth to be comfortable and to pursue our other human needs, but not amassing so much as to become greedy and to harm others or the broader society. As noted, for societies to last, they must be founded on an understanding of human nature, right? To bring out the best and contain the worst, to encourage hope in attaining a good life while diminishing fear. A key here is knowing that, again, human nature is unchanging, so it would seem wise to take it into account when structuring a society. Importantly, our nature can only be altered at the margins, meaning through culture, education, and a rule of law to temper our baser instincts. Humans at best have a veneer of civilization. In terms of evolution, we're really only 15 minutes this side of the ape. So again, our evolution really has been social, not biological. Slavery is no longer accepted. Well, that came about from cultural change, not a change in our DNA. Rather, enough individuals and leaders of good moral character came to see slavery as a terrible injustice, intolerable in a good society, and stood up to it. Rather, enough individuals and leaders of good moral character, you can see that character matters for nations as well as individuals. Now, in our own lives, we can do much to develop good character, to try to gain a good life, to fulfill our human needs. Using our reason to tame our passions, so we can choose what they call the golden mean between the extremes in pursuing happiness. For example, having enough food to sustain yourself, enjoying food, but not becoming a glutton, one of the 7 deadly sins. Nothing in excess. Yet we also need a just society to provide enough opportunity for us to do so. And again, to contain our worst instincts, encouraging hope in the future for your population, not fear. To step back a moment, we're most vulnerable when fear of losing what we have makes it hard to think clearly. It clouds our judgment. We have anxiety about the future. Fear's been called the most negative emotion. Hope, on the other hand, is the expectation of good fortune, looking at the future with confidence, right? A belief that you'll have enough opportunities to pursue happiness. You believe that your efforts can matter. But if you're losing ground, you can become very fearful and angry, or worse. Now, for a just society, a rule of law is essential, as human nature is not always angelic or selfless. And in a just society, humans are all equal in kind, meaning equal under the law, with certain inalienable rights. It's a recognition of our shared humanity. The right to life, again, liberty and the pursuit of happiness, and political rights, the right to vote, the right to free speech and assembly. On the other hand, we all recognize that we're all different in degree as humans, meaning in our talents and abilities. Some are good with mechanics, others with languages, etc. And this is key, as our differences in natural talents and abilities are really part of the natural order, where some may be better equipped to succeed in some ways than others. So even though we're all equal in kind, right, meaning we're all the same species and equal under the law, it doesn't mean we all succeed equally, even in a just society, as there are these differences in our innate abilities and talents. So now let's think about how we can maintain a just society when such natural differences among individuals lead to vast differences in accumulating wealth. Essentially, how 2 competing human needs, freedom and equality, can get out of balance in society. Humans need freedom, right? We desire the least restraints on our actions, especially where economic freedom impacts our standard of living and the opportunity to achieve a good life. And humans need fairness and equality. Excuse me. We want to be treated fairly in society, not taken unfair advantage of by the more powerful, or unfairly discriminated against when it impedes our opportunities to achieve a good life. Even if being treated in a particular case may mean placing some restraints on the freedom of others. For example, nowadays businesses can't use forced labor, but must pay at least some minimum wage. That is a restraint on the economic freedom of individuals to do business, but merited to stop egregious unfairness. Society here is striking a balance between these 2 competing needs of freedom and equality. The key here is a just society needs to maintain a balance between these 2 critical human needs to be functioning and healthy, so that too much economic freedom doesn't lead to too much wealth concentrated in too few hands, creating too much unfairness and inequality, creating too much anxiety, too much fear, too much harm for too many. One stark recent example is the Sackler family, who made billions from pushing opioids and literally killed millions. Pure greed, pure selfishness, pure arrogance. Or at the other extreme, attempting to have perfect equality in society, also doomed to fail in time because it takes away too much individual freedom. And in particular, economic freedom in a modern society. Remember, nothing in excess to attain a good life and a good society. To back up a bit, fear and hope again shed some light here. Fear can arise when society allows for too much economic freedom, resulting over time in just too many left behind. They fear the future, as they see the system as rigged against them, no matter who's in power, turning them in time against society. Fear and even anger may also arise when efforts at equality in society make many feel left out at the expense of others, like the backlash over affirmative action programs. On the other hand, hope dominates for those benefiting from their economic freedom or enough fairness and opportunity in the system that they're hopeful of the future. Now back to our natural inequalities. Again, our innate talents and abilities. Think of it this way. If you leave people free, their natural inequalities they're just going to keep multiplying. Success breeds success, as they say. A prime example is in our early industrial revolution, which created great wealth for some by permitting few restraints on economic behavior or the free market, right? You had laissez-faire capitalism to order society. Yet the result of such unrestrained economic freedom, while creating great wealth for some, ultimately just caused too much exploitation for most, and thus social upheaval. No surprise then that you have someone like Marx and Engels essentially fomenting revolution, or Teddy Roosevelt trying to restrain the moneyed trust and captains of industry, whom he called the great malefactors of wealth. Nothing's occurring in a vacuum. Right? Fear can triumph over hope. The losers see no hope in the future. Right? Workers unite. You have nothing to lose but your chains. Right? To ensure that a large and growing concentration of wealth doesn't cause social unrest, political violence, and ultimately society's demise, freedom, in particular here in the modern world, economic freedom, must be adequately tempered. Again, we don't have slave wages anymore. That's illegal. We now have a progressive income tax. To have a just, humane society, not a dog-eat-dog world, not survival of the fittest, but a caution. The answer is not to sacrifice economic freedom in the extreme, as what happened in the Russian Revolution of 1917, where wealth was violently appropriated. Utopias that have tried to create total equality have all failed, right? Doomed based on our biology, our natural differences in degree, and our need for freedom so our efforts can matter, so we can each pursue happiness. A prime example is Russia under communism. Let's grant that it started out with noble intentions to end exploitation and human suffering caused by a society where wealth and power were extremely concentrated in the hands of a few, and where violence kept everyone else in line. Communism was an attempt to create a more equal society by having workers controlling the means of production and redistributing wealth to people according to their needs. Yet communism was based on an inaccurate concept of human nature. Many social historians of that time claimed that if you could change man's environment, the political and social structures, people would be less selfish, more socially responsible, willing to share. Nurture overcoming nature, essentially, trying to create a new man in a new society. Well, this was doomed to fail. Ordering a society in opposition to our nature can never work. Humans are not motivated for long by ideology alone. To see others benefit by your efforts with no real betterment in your own life? No way. That's too altruistic of you, of we humans. And it takes away too much freedom. Again, a crucial human need for fulfilling our other human needs. And of course, today, we see the most venal aspects of human nature in Russia's oligarchy, what Marx and Lenin would so despise. The bottom line, a good society cannot successfully repress natural talents and abilities and freedom. And these are what make us unique individuals, right? No society can make everyone equal to everyone else. And we have other human needs which shouldn't be repressed, like the confidence and self-worth we gain from the mastery of an area of work, from the respect of the community. These are also human needs. Now, the communists found out pretty quickly that their ideas about changing human nature didn't really work out. And over time, they turned to intimidation and violence, becoming a tyranny, using propaganda and force on the population to comply. A society of fear, not hope. Another example was the Cultural Revolution in China under Mao, where wealthy landowners and merchants were re-educated to see the terrible consequences of their rank selfishness and greed. Attempting here to change hearts and minds, awaken conscience, right? But through intimidation and force. Again, keep in mind, there's always a hierarchy of wealth, as is always a hierarchy of natural talents and abilities among humans. Right? So while we can and should strive for fairness and the elimination of exploitation and discrimination based solely on race, gender, or religion, etc., importantly, even in a just society, we can never make everyone equal in degree. We can never guarantee outcomes that everyone can fulfill all of their human needs. And of course, the best that we can hope for in a just society then is justice through a rule of law that balances freedom and equality and provides more hope than fear in the population. Stated differently, in society, there can be too much freedom and there can be too much equality, but there can never be too much justice, which balances these two human needs. And of course, justice is the foremost need for a society to be cohesive and has the highest value. A society, then, where all are treated equally in kind under the laws and have enough freedom for a fair shot at happiness without undue hindrance from others or the government. And for a fair shot in modern society, we humans need physical safety, quality public education, good health care, a social safety net so none live in deprivation, all necessary to provide enough opportunity to fulfill our human needs, to keep the fabric of society intact for a successful, humane society. Hope you can believe in. And importantly, to best compete against other nations by providing the best opportunities for your people to participate in the nation. Unlike, for example, the failed nation of Afghanistan, where women, half the population, are excluded through intimidation and violence. A just society, then, is the best way to peacefully channel the dangerous instincts of our fallible species, and the best opportunity to contribute to our own happiness and to a more perfect society, a more perfect union. So, now let's look broadly at the key question through an economic lens. Sooner or later, every economic system relies on some form of profit motive to stir individuals. We need to be rewarded for our efforts. That's human nature. Substitutes like slavery, police states, or ideological fervor prove to be too unproductive over time. There's simply not enough glue to keep a society together. Rather, the strongest glue in a modern society with a modern economy is economic growth and widely shared prosperity. Again, the most important of all necessities is not sinking in the world. Now, we've described the concentration of wealth as a natural result of our differences in talents and abilities. So it's no surprise then that vast wealth gaps regularly occur throughout history, as noted in our early industrialization. Now, the rate of concentration varies, and in democracies may actually accelerate the more economic freedom is permitted. The more wealth tends to accumulate at the top. And even in democracies, the wealthy may tend to try to extend their wealth by influencing politics to keep the benefits they enjoy flowing to them. At times, wealth even captures the political realm, like the robber barons in the Gilded Age. For example, until 1913, there'd been no federal income tax, and that only came about after years of popular efforts to make wealthy individuals and businesses pay a share in society's upkeep and development with passage of the 16th Amendment in the Progressive Era. Now, initially, that wealth may have been created by talent and hard work, but second and third generations may not have such talents and often squander the wealth on unproductive activity. That was the main reason for the estate tax that was passed in 1916 in the Progressive Era, to break up great wealth in too few hands gained merely through inheritance. Because they understood that the more wealth gets concentrated over generations, the more it skews society to more of the same, and other important needs in society go unmet. In the U.S. today, the gap between the wealthiest and the rest is at an all-time high. Most Americans live paycheck to paycheck. Almost half of Americans can't pay $400 for an emergency without borrowing. A recent example from a Washington Post poll using data from the Federal Reserve found that just over 1/3 of U.S. adults were in the middle class, which they defined by some key measures, among them a secure job, the ability to save for the future, the ability to pay all your bills timely, having health insurance, and the ability to retire comfortably. Stunning, as so many others are living without the means and in anxiety and likely some fear. We can see this, for example, in the enormous difference today between CEO pay and worker pay. The recent UAW and actors' strikes come to mind. Again, economic disappointment is one of the chief explanations for the rise of either the left or right-wing populism in democracies. Widely shared prosperity, a strong middle class, is necessary for the legitimacy of a democracy. A rising standard of living fosters openness and tolerance and hope, also needed for a democracy. A growing economy and widely shared prosperity is the glue. Cultural matters are secondary. They're secondary. Now, that's not to say that there isn't a cultural backlash from the many harmed by the economic and social upheaval of too much concentrated wealth. Many harmed turn to the right culturally. Guns, crime, they just seem much easier to understand than complex global economics. They look around them and they see there are different people in their world and they blame them for disrupting it. Immigrants, minorities, gays, etc. For example, a local factory shuts down and it's shipped overseas. Now the economic engine that glued that community together is gone, as is the main tax base. Your world's disintegrated in front of you. No more good-paying union jobs, for example, with good benefits. The local downtown gets wiped out, local theaters, stores shutter, etc. The community is hollowed out. The community you knew and grew up in, the glue in your world, is gone. But you want it back. Make America great again. Looking to wipe out disappointment for a chance to feel confidence and pride and to have a sense of purpose and self-empowerment. Cultural identity alone, then, becomes the glue for them in a perilous world filled with loss, insecurity, fear, grievance. Now, this may be getting close to a point where the strength in the number of people on the low end of the scale rivals the strength of the few at the top as they try to maintain the status quo in their favor. And we wind up with an unstable equilibrium in society. Too much economic freedom and not enough equality and fairness. Too much fear over hope. Too much inhumanity. We see elites failing society. They push for policies that generate enormous wealth for themselves. And that be turned off? Okay, so the elites are pushing for policies that generate enormous wealth for themselves, but insecurity and grievance for so many others. When that occurs, as history shows, societies ultimately have met that imbalance either by redistributing some of the wealth for the broader society's benefit or through violent revolution, as we noted in the Russian Revolution or in Mao's China. Contrast that with the aftermath of the 1929 crash and Great Depression, when capitalism had all but collapsed until FDR and the Democratic majority in Congress passed the New Deal, using peaceful means to redistribute some measure of economic and political power to realign the balance for the betterment of society as a whole. For example, passing legislation giving workers the right to organize a union, engage in collective bargaining, strike, and enacting programs like Social Security, the SEC to regulate Wall Street, the FDIC to ensure bank deposits, to prevent bank runs. All these reforms helped ordinary Americans, providing hope for the future. Recall FDR's 1941 speech called the Four Freedoms. Freedom from want, freedom from fear, freedom to worship, freedom of speech. So the key takeaway here is, once again, the concentration of wealth is part of the natural order and inevitable given our unique differences. But periodically it will be adjusted by either violent or peaceful means when it creates too great an imbalance, right? An unstable equilibrium. Another way to think about this is the struggle between communism and capitalism. As noted, communism in theory wanted to create a system based on equality and fraternity, with the working class controlling all to eliminate the terrible exploitation and suffering that had happened. On the other hand, capitalists want the free market to order society, arguing it can supply an abundance of goods, services, and ever more prosperity. Its strength is dynamism and flexibility. It spurs vigor, talents, competition, puts private economic initiative and private property at the center, even arguing that public goods like primary education, municipal water supplies, and roadways are better in private hands. Indeed, modern-day libertarians advocate to go back to a laissez-faire free market, some even wanting to reverse the New Deal and return to a robber baron age with no federal income tax system and no regulation, where the makers have and use the wealth and power as they see fit, and the takers get a trickle-down economy. A most famous proponent of the free market was Friedrich Hayek. For him, it was silly to think that the market could or should be fair or just in distributing wealth, except to help those in the most extreme indigence. He feared too much democracy would try to craft a fairer distribution of wealth. And in that circumstance, he claimed and argued a dictator would be needed to seize power and reorder society in an authoritarian way that would leave the free market alone. First and foremost, the free market must reign supreme. Capitalism over all, if need be. Let the fittest survive. Now, a free market system certainly creates wealth, much more than an agrarian society ever could. But its weaknesses are insecurity and inequality. Capitalism doesn't distribute that wealth evenly throughout society. Its goal is simply profits. It's amoral at best, and typically trying to have as few restraints as possible, like regulations or taxes. For example, using dark money in politics to stymie legislative efforts that would benefit society as a whole, but would harm a moneyed interest, like gun manufacturers. Or recently, a single wealthy individual giving $1 billion to a single political super PAC. How can the vast majority of ordinary Americans compete against that? And of course, the almost $2 trillion in tax cuts, mainly for corporations and wealthy individuals, that passed in Congress in 2017 were solely Republican votes, but put little in the pockets of ordinary Americans and did essentially nothing to grow the economy, which was already at full employment, instead creating greater deficits. Yet, as famous Judge Oliver Wendell Holmes said, taxes are what we pay for a civilized society. To be clear, I'm not faulting a market economy per se, but when a society orders itself around a market economy, it must recognize the downsides and harness that economic system so the broader society can benefit. We should not want an economic model to undermine the very cohesion of society, to cause an unstable equilibrium, or worse. As we know, the Industrial Revolution revealed the brutality and greed of this laissez-faire model. Slums, horrid working conditions, harsh disease, pollution, monopolies, price fixing. The list goes on and on. Not surprising, there was a backlash to such inhumanity in that system. Too much harm and suffering offends our sense of justice and fairness. An economist, Karl Polanyi, understood that, and he argued in opposition to Hayek that humans would not long tolerate living under a truly free market system. Untamed greed causes just too much harm. Commerce over conscience. Marx and Engels wrote the Communist Manifesto in response, right? They offered a different vision of the future. As noted, it was nice in theory, but in practice, they misunderstood human nature. Another reaction was the rise of populism in the American West in the early 1900s, beginning with farmers who had been driven into poverty after years of falling crop prices and higher borrowing costs. They were getting squeezed. So they were trying to wrest some economic and political power away from Wall Street titans. The populist backlash eventually led to the progressive movement, which ushered in many reforms to rebalance the economic and political order for everyday Americans. Again, nothing's occurring in a vacuum. So when the balance between freedom and equality in society tips, and too many are not having enough opportunity to fulfill their human needs and are actually being set back, there will be a populist backlash, either restoring the balance through peaceful means or ending it through violence and revolution. Now, over time, democracies, the free market, has undergone corrective phases through legislation to restore balance. As noted, for example, in the progressive era, the U.S. passed a progressive tax system. It made senators elected by the people and not their state legislatures who've been bought off by the wealthy. It enacted child labor laws, minimum wage and hours, broke up business monopolies, passed food safety, etc. Reforms targeted at specific social ills that were holding people back in pursuing happiness. Peaceful reform, not revolution. As noted, FDR's New Deal also rebalanced wealth and power for the benefit of the whole, essentially meeting the challenges of the Great Depression head on and avoiding the fate of Germany, which chose fascism and war. And key, such positive changes also have come about because of the multitude of individuals who developed good moral character, recognized abuses, elected virtuous leaders, and fought alongside them. Part of living a good life is contributing to the greater society, not simply enriching yourself. The famous economist Adam Smith said it best in his book titled The Theory of Moral Sentiments. There he argued that humans have a need to belong and thus need to have purpose beyond the self. He wrote that the wealth of nations depends not only on the vigorous pursuit of self-interest by the individual, but by the tempering of such productive selfishness by what he called moral sentiments. Sentiments such as compassion, generosity, fair play. These are part of being human. We are a social animal. Selfishness is not a good. Survival of the fittest is not a plan for a just society. A new book written by Martin Wolf called The Crisis of Democratic Capitalism describes how wealth inequality builds up in democracies and the disastrous consequences if left unaddressed, as we've been discussing. So the big lesson from history: we humans need to balance the pursuit of pure self-interest with the vigorous pursuit of a just society. They go hand in hand and are part and parcel of living a good life. Unlike, for example, so many business elites who've become stateless with the rise of globalization, their only allegiance now to global economic success and their own prosperity, rather than the interests of any nation. That's why we see the backlash for America First. As the famous investor Warren Buffett has said, There's class warfare, all right, but it's the rich class that's making war, and we're winning. It makes good people ask, what does it profit a man to gain the world but lose his soul? The meaning is clear, and the warning is clear. If a society fails to harness the wealth created by a market economy, the road to revolution and dictatorship from the left or the right will be open, where too many people are left behind, where too many people don't have a fair shot at fulfilling their human needs. Now finally, let's look at why democracy is the best means to achieve a just society, one that balances freedom and equality and provides the broadest opportunity for its population. As Churchill opined, democracy is the worst form of government until you've tried all the rest. The strength of democracy is representation, legitimacy, while its weaknesses are ignorance and irresponsibility. A democracy can give us a sense of camaraderie in a great experiment, a stake in the outcome. It gives us freedom so that we can grow and learn. It can break down walls of class and privilege. That said, democracy is the most difficult form of government, as it requires the most vigilance on the part of the people and the broadest spread of knowledge, why public education is so crucial. And it means compromise, giving up some freedom and some equality to keep society cohesive, but humane. Not easy, but key. It permits the governed to decide through their elected representatives the best ways to maintain that balance. As we've discussed, we don't have slave wages anymore. We have Social Security. On the other hand, a democracy is vulnerable to the selfishness and arrogance of elites, as noted, as wealth becomes more concentrated. And another key weakness of democracy is that the uninformed can be manipulated. Public opinion can be manipulated, manufactured, through outright lies, propaganda, even swayed against your own true interests by those advancing their own interests, no matter the broader harm. And unfortunately, lies can be seen as truth if one knows nothing about a particular matter. Say about civics or how elections are run. So you can be duped into believing a presidential election was stolen without there ever being any evidence. Ignorance coupled with arrogance is a very dangerous combination. Again, there's a celebration of ignorance, a disdain for knowledge or expertise. Integrity, decency, humility no longer seem to hold weight for some. The commandment not to bear false witness, it's cast aside. Instead of seeking the truth of a matter, you're led by passions, by fears ultimately, swayed to blame innocence, what we call scapegoating, even persuaded that democracy is too weak, too corrupt to deliver, and instead stirred to support a demagogue and even political violence. The bottom line, democracy is not the multiplication of ignorant opinions. Right? Plato feared mobs for this very reason, warning tyranny can follow democracy, as happened in ancient Greece. Democracy is vulnerable to the ambitions of a despot. This is where individual good character matters, learning to tame your passions through reason, to pursue the truth with vigor. Indeed, this is a moral obligation in an individual life and in the life of a democracy. Neither can function well or for long without getting to the truth of a matter. As Ben Franklin opined, an informed citizenry is the best bulwark for democracy. But unfortunately, many individuals don't even truly understand their own human nature, their own true interests. Put it this way, Ignorance is not long enthroned because it lends itself to manipulation by forces that can sway and mold opinion. Ultimately, a political and economic system depends on fundamental norms of behavior, like seeking the truth for success. So we can see the road to democracy's demise will be open to anyone who can persuasively promise security and power to followers who've fallen behind and where their anxiety and fear have turned to anger, even violence. Stalin called such people useful idiots, as they never achieve power, but are merely pawns, swayed by passions. So yes, democracy is difficult, but consider the alternatives. A dictatorship, a police state, a theocracy, an oligarchy, a totalitarian regime, all ruled by propaganda, intimidation, coercion, and violence, not by the will or the consent of the governed. Might makes right. Now let's step back and ask, what are the root causes, either in the development or decay of a nation, beyond even the system of governance? What determines if a challenge to that nation will be successfully met? Well, success depends on the presence of virtuous leaders who bring initiative and vigor and some creative intellect to fashion effective responses to new situations. Leaders like Lincoln, Teddy Roosevelt, FDR. But in society, there must also be enough individuals of good moral character who are ready to be vigilant to maintain it. The price of liberty is eternal vigilance. Socrates opined, a democracy where the population has not developed good character as individuals will not remain so. The founder's greatest fear was of a populist demagogue flattering the mob, subverting democracy, and setting up authoritarian rule. They believed the only thing standing between America and a demagogue was virtuous self-control by citizens who would have the virtue to choose virtuous leaders. The wisdom to choose virtuous leaders. James Madison said that without good moral character in its people, no constitution will matter. Washington said that virtue is a necessary spring of popular government. So truly, the lifeblood of a democracy is a virtuous people. Then a challenge can be met successfully, which raises the energy, the optimism, and the hope of a nation and its people. Think of when we defeated the fascists in World War II. It makes that nation and its people cohesive and more able to meet future challenges. That which doesn't break me makes me stronger. On the other hand, the source of a nation's decay is no mystery. It's the failure of its leaders and people to meet new challenges effectively, to break the status quo when needed, to break up vast accumulations of wealth when needed, to think anew, to sufficiently separate power from wealth. As philosopher Francis Bacon said, he that will not apply new remedies must expect new evils, for time is the greatest innovator. And just a last word about a nation's decay. When a large number are not much educated and have been falling behind economically, then as that group grows larger, it acts as a cultural drag, seen in areas of speech and dress, recreation, civility, addictions, intolerance. There's a hostility to knowledge, education, any expertise, with no sense even of how democracy functions. or the complexities of a modern world. A rejection of reason and truth. Only passions and cultural identity matter now. A quote from a World War I poem to me says it. The worst are filled with passionate intensity, while the best lack all conviction. And on the other side, those with great wealth are insulated and essentially detached from the day-to-day lives of ordinary Americans, with little care for democracy's cohesion, even disparaging those left behind, right? As lazy, as takers, as undeserving, dehumanizing them, while all the while believing their vast wealth and privilege must be merited. Shush. The result is a cycle of decline in both culture and politics as they go hand in hand. The center can't hold. Again, why character matters for individuals and nations. So the broader society shouldn't be so surprised when the many millions who left behind feel powerless to advance their lives and readily turn to a demagogue to save them. History shows us if the concentration of too much wealth disrupts a nation in these ways, the road to dictatorship will be open. With such leaders comes nightfall. As the saying goes, anyone who can make people believe absurdities can make them commit atrocities, as happened in Hitler's Germany, where conscience became a luxury. A luxury. If nothing's true, then anything's possible, including the death of democracy. History is watching. Thank you.